Hello and welcome to slot 7.5. This is Horror Without Violence. We have, as you can see, quite a wonderful panel, some amazing names here, and we're going to pick their brains and we're going to find out how they think and how they enact, impart, and deliver as a GM and or a player at Horror Without Violence. So what we'll do is we'll go around the screen on my visuals here, quick introductions from everybody so we know who we are, and then we're going to dive straight in. We'll go Jason, Tom, Matt, Travis, Paul, if that's okay with introductions. So, Jason, kick us off.
Hi, I'm Jason Pryor, writer, game designer, and general curmudgeon. I've been writing for Cult since the 90s. I also write for Traveler, Through the Breach, and The Strange, plus a few other games along the way. Surreal horror has kind of been my thing since then. And I have a couple of actual plays, Negative Space and With Blood Dripped Wings, that kind of explore those themes. So please go on and check those over at Lost Caravan and TTRP Theater.
Excellent, thank you. And Tom.
Hi, I'm Tom Moore, he, him, professional GM and RPG translator for Cult and Cyberpunk Red. I have written a little bit of Western community content, and I am a freshly baked freelancer for Onyx Path.
Excellent, thank you, Tom. And Matt.
Hello, I'm Matt Sanderson. I'm a freelancer for various horror games out there. Call of Cthulhu, Cult Divinity Lost, Vampire Masquerade being the biggest ones that I'm known for. I write setting as well as scenario material. I'm also one of the co-hosts of the Good Friends of Jackson Elias podcast, where we coincidentally also discuss lots of horror-related gaming topics.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Travis?
Hello, Travis Vengroft. Half of Fool and Scholar Productions. I do the sound design production for The White Vault, which is a horror fiction podcast, and I'm also the DM of Dark Dice, co-DM of Dark Dice, a horror 5e adventure. And I also put out these books where we write, and we've done a couple bestsellers for campaigns that you can terrorize your players with and take the horrors to your home.
Excellent. And Paul?
Hi, Paul Baldowski. I've freelanced in RPGs for the last 20 years. I've worked on Rivers of London, Symbaroum, Liminal, Trophy, Paranoia, Maelstrom, and The Terminator, amongst others. I also published my own games, including Cthulhu Hack, The Desanction, and Sanction. Sanction being a universal game which has some horror supplements like Lost in the Fold and In the Midst of Shades. And one way or another, when I look at the list of games, they all have an element of horror to them, even if I have to inject it myself.
Excellent. So I think it's fair to say you can see across the panel we've got a bit of a collective hive mind here in regard to horror. But today's topic, we're looking at horror without violence. So the first question, which is designed to kind of set us up, and all the questions here are put forward with us just as talking points. So any point, if you feel like you want to go off from the question or you want to build on somebody else's response, please do. Please do. Question one, and what we'll probably do is for the first question, if we go round in the same order, but with some of the other questions, we'll probably just start jumping in over each other and fighting to talk, and then we're going to see horror with violence. So, question one: How do you actually define horror without violence, and can you give a RPG example? So, Jason, how do you define horror without violence?
Oh, wow. You had to hit me first.
Big hitters first on the questions. Sorry.
I mean, the more obvious definition is horror without combat, or horror without some kind of, the blood and guts of a game. For me, there are three levels of horror: revulsion, terror, and dread. And violence kind of falls into that between revulsion and terror, where there is some kind of bodily harm, or there is an attack on somebody else, or on your own, you're doing violence to yourself. So I think that trying to get away from the blood and the guts is actually one of the better ways of invoking dread, the highest type of horror. So invoking the uncanny, the surreal, the liminal, where the character and the players are in that dreadful zone of the unknown. And I think it could be done through most RPGs if you handle it right. But I should have mentioned this in the previous one of the previous panels, but something is wrong here. It does this especially well because it creates a Lynchian nightmare logic where just sitting in a diner talking with between the characters just becomes pure nightmare fuel. Just the whole atmosphere and the ambiance just seeps into you like an infection. So I like that those wonderful little moments where you're away from combat and you're away from blood and guts and just getting into the nitty gritty of the soul.
Nice one. Thank you, Jason. I should have said we should have taken a sweepstake on how long it would have taken for someone to mention David Lynch. But I think Jason's nailed it straight away and absolutely in the right context. That's a really lovely answer there, Jason. Tom.
Yeah, I was very fast to answer the question with, well, of course, there's nobody punching each other. But then horror, to have a horror response, there must be some violation or at least threat of violation. And this is more or less also violence. You have a lot of emotional violence out there. And I think if we say without any violence, we can't do, or at least I don't know how to do horror, because I very much like the emotional part of it. I don't need to cut you open with a knife. I'm going to do it with my voice. And I think that's the thing that I need to run horror. So I am very happy to say horror without violence is without rolling to attack or open your gut with something, but yeah, going into the soul and into the mind. And I think it can be done to great effect in games like Small Fears, where we don't want to see the protagonist bodily harmed, or Brindlewood Bay. I would never punch one of these nice old ladies trying to solve an eldritch horror mystery. That's just something that's not happening, but there is a lot of horror in there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tom. Matt.
Well, Jason had the easy one going first there, because I think a lot of people by the reactions here are, combat, just cross that out completely. Yeah, there's plenty of definitions of the word violence, and I think the weather outside my window is currently doing a good attempt at trying to make its case known for one of those definitions. That horror is all about change for me. That it's something that upsets the natural order. Now there is obviously calm, peaceful way that life just plods on, and then some raging cultist comes in with a knife and starts to hack and slash. That's violence, but also you've got, as Jason touched on, the more surreal aspects. One case that I'm probably going to come back to repeatedly through this is Unknown Armies does a very good job of categorizing different types of horror or different types of madness that can result from that change to the status quo. Violence is one of them, but you've also got the kind of the weird, the unnatural, helplessness, so being put in situations where you can't do anything about it. Isolation, where you are completely removed from folks, which maybe highlight or signposting for another panel later on this evening for sci-fi horror. That could be a big part of that comes into that topic. And also the self, which I think is probably one of the most poignant types of horror, is where you lose track of the I in the statement of I am, I think, therefore I am. You're not too sure of who you are anymore, because you've been pushed to do acts that you maybe thought you weren't capable of, and that they are counter to your whole philosophy. And all of those last four can be done completely without the need to break out fists, or in an RPG context, roll for initiative, monkey boy, and get those weapon stats out.
Yeah, okay. I absolutely see where you're going there, and I really love that idea that, especially that the self-doubt aspect. I think that's that's something that we'll all probably get really stuck into later as the panel goes on. Travis.
Everything that's been said prior is fantastic. I will just add to it. Horror without violence can take on many forms. It can be the increasing tension of a scene or location through descriptive text. It can be that you're getting to the haunted house, but maybe you notice some changes on the grass on the front lawn before you reach the haunted house. These little steps. There's a book, Death House, it's the opening chapter of Curse of Strahd in 5e. Like, spoilers for part of it, like there's really not a lot of combat in half of it. It's just descriptions of rooms. And you're just getting lots of descriptions of rooms, like page after page after page. And it's dread-inducing. And there's no actual threat of violence there, but you know something wrong has happened in this house and you're going deeper into this mystery. So the tension, the fear of the unknown, telling stories, players will often psych themselves out if they are given the opportunity to tell like campfire stories in a fantasy or modern setting. Like, oh, well, the guy with the hook for a hand, they'll tell the story unrelated to your adventure. And suddenly now, like, sitting in a basement with your friends playing by candlelight, like everyone is legitimately scared, even though it's just an extra layer on top of it. But it can also be very natural. The last thing I just wanted to add was that mental health can come into it. Matthew, you'd brought it up. I ran an adventure where a player, his whole thing was he wanted to be an adventurer because he was losing his memories and he was getting Alzheimer's and wanted to make sure that his family was well off before he was gone. And he wanted to make sure that they were safe. So it wasn't the fear of being hurt for him. It was the fear that his family wouldn't be without him. And that, like, the tone of the campaign was very different and definitely terrifying, but in not a violent way. And there are ways that you can do that with nature or things within reason, with permission, with consent, and all these tools.
Excellent. Thank you, Travis. If you see me staring down, apologies. I'm writing notes to ask questions for later because I know I'm going to get somebody else is going to say something. Paul's going to say something in a minute. I'm going to go, oh, yeah. And then I will have forgotten the thing I would have thought of earlier. Paul.
I drew the shortest straw by
did.
being at the end of this. I mean, so one thing that occurred to me before this was, I suppose, the definition of violence. And I guess Matt referred to it to a degree. It's the actual definition of violence is split between violence as a definition of harm or violence as a definition of kind of intensity. The violence of an argument. You can have an argument, you can have a discussion, but the moment you start talking about the violence of it, you've taken it up a level. And I suppose it is the nature of the events that are going on around you tripping over that threshold into a violent situation where the intensity of what's going on suddenly skips up a level. And notionally in role playing, that's kind of how your adventures are structured. You start with the normal and then you trip things up a level, and that maybe takes you into Act 2 and then finally into Act 3, sort of thing. That the intensity is building, because right at the beginning you almost don't want that violence of the situation to be. It needs to be ordinary and mundane, so that when the violence hits, Act 2 is noticeable. You don't have to cry out Act 2, people. They feel it. They feel it because something has happened. You've hit a new notch. And I suppose in terms of that, I mean, referring to the stuff I've worked on in the past, Symbaroum, for example, is the part of the intensity within that setting is the things like the environment, the actual Davokar forest that is kind of dominant within the region. It's a fantasy where you've got colonists who have driven out the natives, and there's this great forest to the north that 700 to 800 miles of just dense forest. But the further you get into the forest, the increasing sense that something really terrible, horrible has happened here, and you go from the natural into something which not only suggests things have happened, but begins to actually ramp up the threat to the individuals. And it's not necessarily that you're being attacked by a bear or some wild, chaotic, corrupt abomination, but the actual environment around you is beginning to sort of creep into and if affect the group that you're in. And actually, the intention of it is that to a degree that you begin to realize that the people you're with might actually become affected by the environment and sort of turn against you.
Yeah, okay, I like that. And there was I think it was Matt that said it earlier, you know, horror is the change of the natural order. And there is that yeah, that is a really good underpinning for those of us listening to the panelists here. That's a really good kind of underpinning statement to this whole thing. And I know you could probably apply that for those of us that have been in many panels already this weekend and have more panels coming up. That is a really good underpinning statement, I think, that covers so much of what we're talking about, whether it is, I think, Matt, you said you're doing sci-fi later on panel. A few of us, we did isolation panel yesterday. And it's, you know, there's different aspects to look at it. And I think that horror is the change in the natural order. That's a really kind of nice way to under the umbrella, really, for everything that we're going to be talking about. Okay, what I'd like now, actually, and what we'll do, so we don't put Paul in the hot seat every single time. We'll go in reverse, Paul, so you can jump in first and put you in the other hot seat. So what I'm going to ask you is, I think the people tuning in, what they'd really like to hear is if you can give an example of, and this is quite wide. So if something that you've written, something that you've GM'd, maybe you've played in a moment, but a moment where there is horror without violence. And you can talk about it from either aspect. You know, how successful or different or unsuccessful was it to horror with violence? So a moment you've played, GM'd or written, and how successful was it with the differences in regard to having violence involved? Paul, welcome to the hot seat.
Marvelous. So I will probably opt for something I've written, but also equally GM'd a lot because of the playtesting involved in the process. There is an adventure called Cthulhu Hack called Tainted Meat, which first of all, you don't put that name on the on the slot if you're inviting people. Well, I mean, maybe you do because that makes them worry. But so that the notion of the whole situation, and I guess it's not unique by any measure, because again, I guess the whole point, as I touched upon before, is with a good horror adventure, you are ramping up from the mundane to increasing intensities of of horror. The notion very much here is that investigation is uncovering the kind of the echoes of violence in the location that you're visiting. The violence has actually already happened, but you are basically being stranded in a location, finding a town. It's a bit of a sort of trope of horror, I suppose. But as you walk around the town and you meet the residents, and you get to that, who are all very welcoming and pleasant, but the situation begins. You feel that there is, you begin to sense that something has happened, that there has been a violence before, and it's and when I run it, and generally speaking, for the first hour, there's a lot of back and forth of chat, conversation with the locals. They will see, this rundown town on the coast, and they meet the guy at the garage who's going to fix their car for them. They meet a few of the locals and the local general store owner, who happens to also be the sort of mayor of the town. But every single time, about halfway through the adventure, after they've spoken to these people, they will begin to note what what they're not seeing, the absence within the town. There aren't any children, for example, despite there being parents of a certain age. There is a sense that this place is trying its best to carry on, but there's also a kind of, I'm going to say hunger. It's the wrong word to the locals, and it just becomes increasingly clear that yes, there is something unsettling and wrong, and normally you will see it in the player's eyes when they begin to cotton on to it. It is that moment of as I said, it's the creeping sense of horror that as I said, in this case, the violence has already happened. And I guarantee, even as I'm describing it, I'm trying to be obtuse about what actually happens, and I guarantee you'll have gone the wrong way with what's happening. You've got to buy it. Part of the Three Faces of the Wendigo book. But there's always a point where as I was running it, which is when I knew that I probably I had what I needed, and what I'd written worked. That you see it in their eyes, and the players then suddenly realize there's probably a sense of disgust and fear and horror that what all this is adding up to. They've suddenly found all the jigsaw pieces, or enough of them, to get that unsettling view of what's happening.
Okay, I love that. First of all, you give me a question for later, which is always welcome. So thank you for that, Paul. But I really like that idea. You're beginning with the aftermath of violence. So the violence is almost taken out of the scenario because it's happened, and the characters, the players, they arrive after the violent episode. That's a really nice way to deal with it. I suppose that's obviously coming down to the way that you've written it, it's the way that it's presented. But I think if players or GMs that are listening to this, if you're looking for a scenario and violence isn't something that you're not into rolling dice for combat and those things, that's a really nice kind of idea to look at, or way to go. So look at Paul's, was it Tainted Meat, Paul?
Tainted Meat from Three Faces of the Wendigo.
Yeah. It sounds like a lovely jaunt in the countryside or any occasion. Thank you, Paul. Travis, same question. So let's go.
Paul, I also have many questions. Outside of my sleep deprivation campaign, we did a really cool one-on-one. There was a shipwreck. You have the survivor of a shipwreck, and he strands himself. He wakes up on a sort of a frozen area. He thought he was dead. Straight up thought he was gone. Like, he thought he was the goner, rolled poorly, separated from the rest of the party. That's it. He's there. He's awake. And he's now on an island, and it's freezing. It's the middle of winter on a barren island. And he comes across another survivor, and the two of them, an NPC and the player, basically try to survive the winter and try and get through the polar night, trying to find food, trying not to freeze to death. One of them has an infection of sorts, a supernatural infection, which is kind of getting worse, which escalates. And, it's like body horror stuff, but it's not aggressively violent. It's just creepy, and it unnerves them to a point where it's like, okay, is this gangrene, or is this going to be an Evil Dead situation? We're not really sure. So it takes a direction where this guy, basically, we spent like an entire 4-hour session of just like survive the winter. And there were ruins to discover because there were some people who'd lived on the island before who are now long dead, sort of a couple things with Paul there, but we didn't get too deep into it because the main character's, true to the fantasy setting, was very illiterate. So every time he came across writing, he's like, yeah, that's cool. And then just kept going, as he would. And then eventually he got through this whole thing, and when he finally reached the party and the rest of the group, he realized it was just him. And you hear people who've gone up on mountains and had been stuck in terrible situations, and there's this ghost mountaineer with them, their ghost friend, their ghost companion. I forget the exact phrase, but they're not really there. They're just a part of your mind trying to rationalize and keep you going. And there was no combat. It was all just him, his leg with the infection, and trying to make it through and get enough food and warmth to make it through a couple of days. And not more than a couple of days, but to reunite with his party and get off the island. And that, no combat, lots of really intense role playing. It was quite a cool 4 hours for us. We had a lot of fun with.
That sounds amazing. And I know that a lot of people do get amazing role play out of combat situations, but I think also, like you're saying, those opportunities they present, if as long as the players are happy, some wonderful role playing opportunities where combat is perhaps removed and it is more of that psychological or emotional or personal reflection, investment. Just wonderful moments to explore role playing as a GM and a player. Thank you, Travis. Matt.
I think I can probably split my answer into two here because I give highlight to a couple of different things. The first one being one of the key moments that stuck with me is quite formative for me, shaping the type of games that I like to write and the type of games that I like to play, was getting to play one particular thing, which is way back in the day when Delta Green used to be a Call of Cthulhu setting back in the good old days. There was a lovely book called Delta Green Countdown that included a scenario in there called Night Floors.
I can see the cover now. I can see that wonderful cover in my head now. Yeah.
It's a great one. Night Floors now is part of Impossible Landscapes, but it's a setting where you just end up going from encounter to encounter to encounter in this very weird place, and ultimately ending up in potentially, if you go through into the Hasta mythos, got a follow on from it, you can end up in Carcosa, this wonderful, surreal, dark, horrible, and almost completely unpopulated place. So there's no people there to kind of suddenly roll your fighting brawl against or whip out your Tommy gun to start hosing them down. It's just all this stuff that's there. And it was a kind of a transformative moment for me, realizing you can do a scenario where there's not really anyone to bounce off. There is just the environment, and the place itself is the antagonist. And from stuff that I've written, again, probably going into a bit more spoiler territory than Paul did with his, although we'll have to get together afterwards because you'll have to tell me where this place is, because a seaside town without any kids sounds like heaven to me. I don't care if all the locals have killed everyone else. But yeah, one of my own scenarios, Pulvis et Umbra Summus from Fear's Sharp Little Needles, has a very typical Call of Cthulhu scenario. You've been invited to the reading of a will from someone that you've never really even heard of, but they've left you a whole lot of money. Descending into, well, there's no one here. This has all been a bit of a waste of time. Going back to town and suddenly finding you are the epicenter of an effect that is completely eroding and destroying everything around you, turning everything to dust. And I've had a couple of moments where players have decided to try and either punch each other, or they've got so angry at each other that they've resorted to violence, but it has absolutely no effect. Your punch, when you throw it at someone, has no impact. There's no pain behind it. And people quickly suddenly realize, but shit, we can't solve this problem via violence. We've got to put our heads together and think of some other way of answering this. We can't punch our way out of this situation, damn it. What do we do? And knowing that everything around them has this ticking clock where everything will eventually just be reduced to its constituent atoms is a lovely kind of penny drop moment where they think, oh yeah, the normal rules don't apply here. What the hell do we do?
Joe, I just lots of bells ringing, and I know it's the same as I've seen the other panelists kind of nodding and having wide-eyed moments as well. Again, you've added a question for later, Matt, so thank you. But that idea, I really love what you just said then about even when the players attempt violence, the removal of violence as a solution or an opportunity, it forces that I suppose different confrontation, that different way of troubleshooting, problem solving, interaction with the other players and things. So that's actually a really nice thing is for those GMs and players that are watching, if violence erupts, it's okay, let it happen. But what is the impact? Does it work? Doesn't it work? And if it doesn't work, be very clear about it, because then there's going to have to be another solution, a non-violent solution to the problem. Or maybe there's not a solution, and just good luck, which is reminiscent of my cult game yesterday. Just good luck. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. But we'll come back to that later, I think. Thank you, Matt. Tom?
I'm gonna go to Vaesen, since like Cthulhu, it is a game where you can resort to violence, but it does have the same effect if you try to shoot a Shoggoth as if you're trying to shoot a mermaid, they're gonna kill you. And if the mermaid doesn't do it within the first 5 minutes and you kill it, it will come back and be even more pissed at you. And so violence is an option in Wesen, but it's not the solution. And you have to figure out a ritual to solve the conflict in whatever way. And I wrote a mystery for modern Wesen that's called Remember Me. And it has a very strong theme of identity loss, memory loss, Alzheimer's. And in one finale, I had a player dissolving. The people around were forgetting him. He was forgetting himself. He lost extremities. He lost stats from his character sheet. And it was a race against the clock to fulfill the ritual before this character was gone. It was such a beautiful scene, such an intense moment. The players were on the edges of their seats, trying to do the best. And, well, 4 people went in, and the entire 3 people group came out of the mystery. And it was brilliant. I loved it.
And again, that idea there, where if you're creating so obviously when we get into combat, it's almost as if to a degree, whatever system you're playing, whether it's the dice, whether it's about hit points, whether it's about how many rounds of action there are, hopefully there's going to be some climax, even if it's the fight doesn't continue, someone escapes or something dies, probably the players, depending on what horror game we're playing. But with a non-violent horror moment, adding in that time element, the idea of time sensitivity within what the players are experiencing, I think that either as a contrast, giving them that time sensitivity where, oh my god, you've got to work something out, go for it, is a very heightened climactic way to look at non-violent horror, but also that very expansive time is not an issue, keep existing in this dread, is also quite a fun thing to play with. So I'm glad we've mentioned time, because that was something that I was hoping we'd be able to talk about in regard to how horror works and where we can let the players sit and how as a GM we manage that. So we'll probably come back to that at some point, Tom. Thank you for that. Jason?
I'll probably go with the opening in negative space, because I needed to do a juxtaposition, because the characters were coming to Willow Hills separately. And the first group that they encountered, basically a police officer that looked like a pork roast had been sitting, in a July summer for 2 weeks. So the threat of violence, I wanted to pull it away. So when the Descendant had their scene, they arrived at a gas station, had this wonderful moment with the attendant, who was this young woman. He's interacting with her. They were calming the story down, and then he begins to notice these little uncanny things, that the prices of the cigarettes and the prices of the gasoline are very old. And as he begins to realize that the forest is kind of like crouching in on him and pressing in on him, he realizes that he's actually in an abandoned gas station. So when he goes back in, there's an opening to the back, and he can hear the attendant basically saying, thank you for coming here. I've been so alone for so long, but can you please stay for at least a little while, because it hurts here. It really, really hurts. And he played out just talking to this ghost. So the violence had happened a long time ago. He found out her story and just basically shared that moment and kept this ghost, alive for at least a few more moments. And by the end of it, you could just see all the blood had drained out of every other player's face, and there was tears, and it was just wonderful because it was just this poignant, dark, yet horrific moment. Is because at the end, the attendant basically said, "I don't want to be alone anymore. Can you please come in?" And he's like, I can't do that. I can't do that. And just kind of retreated. And it was just no violence, no threats, just it was the poignant of I have to let you go rather than I'm escaping you.
Yeah, beautiful moment there. It's the horror of existence. It's giving players dilemmas to consider. That in itself can be a fantastic horror device. Is giving that very divisive moment to the player to make that choice to see what happens. But I think sometimes as a player, it's not even a choice, but just even having it presented is like, oh my god, that's the way you talked about it, Jason. That is incredibly sad, and I imagine being in that moment, being a player in that game, is so incredibly kind of involving for everybody at the table to kind of experience that as well. I definitely would have been crying during that. I've got some more questions. I would say one of the things that I haven't got down as a question, and I always think is really really great for people watching this to be able to hear, is in regard to horror without violence. Is there any kind of media that you are looking at the moment? Film, theatre, novelization, factual, biography, anything that you kind of go, yeah, this is something that's really, kind of pinged me at the minute, and I'm really into this because it's really inspiring in X, Y, and Z. Just because I think sometimes when we can recommend stuff, people go away and go, right, I'll have a look at that. I managed to watch a couple of, I'll tell you what I am watching. A few weeks ago, I watched some From, which was the creators of Lost. And so I haven't watched it all yet, but lovely concept. Some really nice performances. But that I know there is violence in it, but as a location, there's a lot of violence in it. But as a location, it is quite haunting just as a concept, as an idea. But I've started watching Dark, the German serialized thing. I'm only a few episodes in. We're really clever, really enjoying that. But no particular order. Is anybody watching or reading anything that they're kind of going, this is fantastic?
On the way here to Tokyo, I was reading Eric LaRocca's Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Met. And the violence is implied, but it is quite possibly one of the most disturbing stories I've ever read. And all it is the IMs and emails between these two women. And one is kind of a very dominant person who's trying to, get somebody that's submissive, and just the interaction of when it flips, where the submissive person just becomes, well, I don't want to ruin it, but my God, it's just, I'm sitting on the plane and going, okay, I might actually be physically ill at this point. And
wow.
there's no violence, so to speak, until the very end. But there's one line that resonates through the entire story, which is, what have you done today to deserve your eyes? And just
a question we should all ask ourselves.
Yeah. So,
Jason, okay, I've written that down. Things that have gotten worse since we last met.
Yes.
Okay.
Last spoke, I think.
Since we last spoke, sorry. Thank you. I'm always keen for recommendations. Fantastic. Anybody else watching, reading anything, seeing anything that they're like, this is it, this is what everybody should be into? Travis, I think you're about to offer something.
I'm not through with it, so I can't say if it's amazing. I got to a point where I was like, holy crap, this plot twist is just messing with my mind. I love this thing. But it could take a turn and just be not a good show. But right now, as of I want to say 6 or 8 episodes in, I'm enjoying Miruku-chan. It's based off of a manga. It's an anime where this girl sees ghosts and they're dead, but she can't acknowledge them because she's not sure what'll happen if they know that she can see them. Like she's not really sure, and it's this like I don't know if this will affect my life. I don't know if they can actually do anything to me, but they can certainly make it difficult to concentrate in class because she's a high schooler. But like, they're really gruesome and disgusting ghosts, and like the most terribly drawn things you can see. These ghosts are so gross, and like I would be wincing just seeing one in real life, of course. But this girl just tries to she doesn't see them. That's what she tries to do. That's the whole thing, and it's deeper than that. But if I say more, I spoil some of the better moments and reveals of the show that I've seen so far. And I know it's based on a manga, which may be better, maybe not. I haven't looked into it yet. It's probably also a light novel, I suspect. But I don't think at any point in time she's going to die or be hurt. But I do think like, oh my gosh, her life is going to be messed up potentially in some way if she does acknowledge them, if they see the sweat and realize that it's from them, because they're watching her sometimes. It's interesting.
Even that horror, that in itself, that horror, that violence, that constant resistance to accept what's there. That's, that scene, that sounds amazing. Okay, what was it called again, Travis?
Miruko-chan, Meiruko-chan. It's based on a manga called The Girl Who Can See It.
The manga is great, and what I love about it is that it's very tongue in cheek in a lot of the aspects. But the horror aspects, my God, those ghosts. There's a scene on the subway. Will not spoil it.
Okay, I'm gonna have to get into this.
I just had to throw the book across the room.
Get away from me, horrible book.
Yes.
Amazing. Matt, Tom, Paul, anything you're kind of into at the minute where you're going, I want to recommend this to our viewers?
I need a second, then I'm ready.
We'll come back to you, Tom. Matt?
I can think of one that's on my list of stuff that I want to check out because I know that it fits the description. And it's actually one of the things that I had in my notes of comparing for certain elements that made it into the Hot War RPG. The inspiration, I think, very much behind the Zone of Alienation in that game, which is it's the novel Roadside Picnic, but it's been filmed as Stalker. Which mainly the reason I haven't got around to watching it yet is because someone described it as 3 hours in which nothing happens, and 3 hours of having 3 hours of my life spare seems to be an incredibly rare thing to happen these days. But yeah, that very much is the only thing that really comes up on my radar as things without violence, because everything else I was thinking through is, nope, this is really violent. Nope, this is really violent. Well, like my go-to film that I always recommend to horror films, horror fans, is Martyrs, because it's one of my all-time favorite films. One of the most incredibly violent things I've ever seen, and almost deliberately recommend it to people for that reason. But not massively relevant to this discussion.
But I think actually, Matt, I think you've hit on a really good point there. Actually, is that a lot of, and I might be talking for all of us here, so please all shake your heads when I get this wrong. But a lot of what we consume, whether we watch it, whether we read it, there are those beautiful moments of horror without violence, and oftentimes they are fantastic contextual or relational kind of moments in narrative, in story, but they are often interlaced with moments of violence. And I think that contrast of the two, so horror without violence, is an amazing way to obviously tell our games and play our stories. It doesn't mean to say, for anybody listening, that you should be staying away from violence within your games or your storytelling or your GMing, because those can be really beautifully story-led moments. Or even if you just like rolling dice and doing a bit of combat, everybody's game is different. Do go for those moments. But I think, you think of those moments, it's a very called upon moment, but you have the isolation, the environmental, the gruesome, the graphic, but then the moment, like everybody. Oh, am I here? Have I gone?
You're still here.
Back.
You've gotten back.
Yeah, I was saying the moment in the thing that everyone remembers is, you got the two guys, McCready and is it Childers? I can't think at the end who's he sitting with. But it's the two guys at the end, Childs sitting in the snow at the end. That is like the moment where everyone's going, this horror's not over. This is what's staying with us. This is what's sitting with us. Mm-hmm. But there has been moments of violence within that. So maybe we are looking at moments. It doesn't have to be a whole narrative or campaign without violence. It's how do we do horror moments, aspects without violence. Thank you, Matt. I've written that down as well. I've written down Martyrs and Roadside Picnic, plus Matt's horror is finding 3 hours spare. That's the existential crisis there.
If you go with Martyrs, please watch the original French version. Do not watch the American one.
Oh,
it has a
God.
happy ending.
Oh, what? Shame on them. Okay,
Even worse than I thought.
Thank you. Tom.
So I am not finding the Netflix series I wanted to recommend. So I have 2 podcasts for you. One of them I've listened entirely. That's Alice Isn't Dead. And it goes very much into American road folklore and horror. And I love this show. It's done by the people behind Welcome to Night Vale. And it's brilliant. And then there's another one that I just started listening to. I heard the first episode of Tower 4. I think
I've listened to loads of Tower 4. It's fantastic. Really, really good fun. Yeah.
The setup is amazing. You have a guy who goes for half a year somewhere into a lonely firewatch tower in the middle of nowhere, and there is like one radio. He's watching the forest, looking for fires, and he can talk to one person on the other side. And that's all I know. But
I'll stick with it, Tom. It gets fantastic. Yeah. I would recommend that. I'd also recommend a little podcast called The White Vault. I don't know if Travis and his partner they create it, and Travis' partner writes it. Travis creates it as well. It's I have to say, I am on the 2nd season. I don't want to do any spoilers. It's fantastic. It's a really fantastic way. And if you're looking at things like horror without violence, and as we talked about, interspersed moments, it's a very well written, very well performed, very well produced production. So Travis has not paid me for that advert. That is free of charge. It is actually a bloody brilliant show. So please get on that and watch that as well, or listen to that on a podcast. That is fantastic. Thank you, Tom. I totally recommend and back up that Tower 4 as well. I've got about an hour drive to work on the way there and the way back, so I tend to go through podcasts or audio dramas very much within our chosen genres. So yeah, if you have any other recommendations, chuck them in the YouTube or Twitch chat for us, please. That'd be amazing. Paul.
In the moment, I mean, I'm not actually probably reading or watching anything that fits in this category. I suppose if we look broader to this year, earlier this year, so I'll give 2 things that I've visited and will visit soon. So earlier in the year, having not heard it before, and it bothers me that somebody managed to do a game and stuff in the time before I actually got there. I started listening to the Silk Verses, which is a quasi sort of modern world, which is basically affected by the fact that everything kind of has a god behind it. There are dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of gods, and they affect the sort of the whole world to the extent that even your daily coffee is dependent upon the grinding god to be able, to bring you your beverage. But there are some gods like the Trawler Man, who are just there's truly unsettling. And the nature of the audio drama is some of the episodes are just one voice or a conversation, and it's the way they interact with each other. And the soundscape behind them that creates the unsettling notions. But there are other stories which are more straightforward. There's a really weird one about a call center, for example, and there's also one about a office which has a kind of promotion day when people are getting. Well, yeah, I won't go too deeply into it, but there's some really unsettling stories.
Silk Verses.
It's one of the worst. It's like I listened to that one. I'm like,
Oh, stop it.
Yeah, the Office one is really, really unsettling.
Yeah.
And so I actually listened to the first season of that because I saw that there is a game. It's sort of carved from Brindlewood type game. And so I was looking to. I'm the GM who's constantly trying to run things that that I've never run before, so I have to do a deep sort of
Yeah.
dive, and that's. But that was a really enjoyable deep dive, and there's like three seasons, tons and tons of episodes. I haven't got anywhere near the end of it, but the first season was hugely entertaining. On the opposite end of the spectrum, what's coming up, hopefully, is I'm going to pick up the last part of the Southern Reach trilogy, the fourth book.
Oh, I need to get
Um,
that. Jeff
um,
Vandermeer.
yeah, so Jeff Vandermeer's
Yes.
Absolution.
Yes. Yeah.
So Annihilation, the movie, is all well and good. It
The
doesn't
book.
really give you a view of what the book's about, which is kind of
Yeah.
invasion taken to a completely different space, invasion that textually
Yeah.
infects the environment and the people in it. And it's weird, and you might there might be some challenges as you read through the books. They are very different. Each part of the series is very different in how it
Yeah.
approaches this invasion and how Area X is changing. But it's definitely the nature of horror without violence, because it's invasion without violence.
Yeah. Yeah.
It takes it to a new level. So yeah, Vandermeer has done, rather like Douglas Adams before him and others.
Yeah.
It's the fourth part of the trilogy, which has only just come out, and it's either going to be something I'll get for Christmas or I'll buy after. So
Exactly. Yeah, likewise, likewise. But you can imagine that being the tagline for the film, can't you? A new trilogy, part four. But
yes.
I think Paul, what you with Vandermeer, that absolutely, and I totally recommend these books as well. They are superb. Although I haven't read the fourth. But going back to our kind of tagline of the panel, horror is the change of the natural order. That is fundamental to what Area X is, and how the people that are interacting with it kind of experience that. And I remember buying the trilogy. I think I was in Paris with my wife, and it was when I proposed to her, because we went to the famous Shakespeare and Co. bookshop, and I remember getting that. I remember going, "I'll get you a book," and then just buying myself loads of books. But yeah, fantastic books. Totally, totally recommend. Amazing, amazing. I always
Can I add
wondered
another? Can I add
Oh
one more?
yeah, go on, Jason, please. Yeah.
Because just speaking of The Office, and this is, I don't even know if you can really define it as horror, but for me, it is horrific. It is the Apple Plus series called Severance, where basically you are these people have their personalities or memories just basically spliced. So they have a work memory and they have their outside memory, and these two memories cannot interact. The moment they imagine being at work, and you are always at work. So the moment you enter it, that is your memory inside. So these people are basically in the innies, as they call them, continue to work through their 8-hour day, and then they leave, and they instantly arrive again, as far as their perception, to their perception. And the only violence is literally self-harm, because these people are trying. A couple of them just try to escape, to force
Okay.
their outside self. Please let me out, because I don't want to do this anymore. And there's also all these psychological bits where they're inside, where it's a very brutish kind of office. There's a lot of psychological traps inside of it. But just that idea that if you ever quit, the person on the outside, any person ceases to exist. So literally you're killing part of yourself, because that other self exists only at work. So
Well, if there was ever a social message about the devastation of the workforce, I think that's it. I have seen the trailer for that. It does look amazing. Yeah, it does look amazing. Right, we'll thank you, Jason. Thank you, everybody, for your recommendations. We'll jump back onto the question. I think Jason's actually really nicely led us onto this, talking about that kind of the different processes of how horror there within Severance. So question number 3, what narrative, and I've kind of put in brackets here, psychological, could be senses, could be environmental, atmospheric, mood, tension, mood, suspense, what narrative tools help to deliver horror without violence? And I know that you could talk about all of these individually in different ways and things, but maybe is there something that you prefer, either as a GM or as a writer? Let's go Jason to Paul. So Jason, please.
Wow. Whenever I'm trying to do horror without violence, I'm always trying to play to a theme. Like I try to set up the scenario so that the player will explore it on a psychological basis and try to remove any aspects of the violence from it. So just kind of, and then when they finally get to the end of that narrative stream, there's kind of a stinger. Usually a psychological stinger. So, example, with Blood Dipped Wings, one of the players is constantly trying to avoid doors because they know what their other personality or the person that they're trying to kill is on the other side of this door. And after 9 episodes, they realize that the person on the other side of this doorway is actually themselves. That they have the person that they are is literally the monster, and that the face that they are wearing was the person that they actually murdered. So it was just basically always trying to make them afraid of themselves and always trying to put up barriers between themselves and their memories. So just, I'd like to try to have some kind of a narrative thread and see where that's going to, have like a destination, and then try to play to that. And sorry that this camera keeps on moving. I don't know why.
It's the fun of the con for you this year, Jason, is tracking you across wherever you go. Thank you. I think that's really cool. So having that kind of core narrative thematic aspect and driving it through, making that resonate throughout all the kind of the I suppose the scenes, the decisions, the interactions. Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Tom.
I come with the list. So the first thing that I'm doing is adjusting the voice, because people tend to let their guard down if you're soft-spoken, non-threatening, and slowly increasing the intensity of what you're saying. And that's a very helpful tool. If you then have several characters in the scene, you can give them unreliable narration, some information to one, other information or opposing information to another one. And if I want to drive up the tension in the scene, I'm asking leading questions. The player has always the option to answer outside of the box of the question, but there's always a push, and they have to spend energy to push against the invitation to lean into the worst option that I might be offering by this question. The best example is actually with violence that I have, but there was a scene where a player identified an NPC in a way with their parent, and at some point during the scene they drew the gun. And then at some point I asked, so this person is now in front of you. You have a gun in your hand. What do you do? And they have the entire range to say, I throw away the gun, I'm gonna pull the trigger, whatever. But it leads towards a direction. And even if they go for the non-violent decision, it was on the table for a second, and they were thinking about the options. And there's a certain energy in the room. Something I'm experimenting on, that's a technique of the field of psychology, is using keywords. If I identify a word a player is using that is connected with dread or horror for them, I'm going to repeat that in my descriptions a few times. And it doesn't have the same meaning for me, but it has for them. And so it's going on with drawing the picture in their head. And another thing that's also good for action scenes, even if they don't necessarily include violence, is short cuts. And I often do these in moments of decisions or dice rolls. And sometimes the dice have already been rolled. We see the results. But before going into the solution of the roll, I just skip to another player and go through their thing. And we know that something probably not great is going to happen since we see the roll results. But there's not a resolution immediately, and that draws out the tension and the feelings of horror. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. There's loads of really good tools there, I think. Some nicely for, if you're being a GM in terms of how you can interact and how you can play with that. Fantastic. Matt.
Rather than treading over ground, so like Jason hit a big one on my list already. Again, curse you, which is the psychology behind it. But one of the things, I think the biggest thing I would add to it is that it's very easy for players or their characters to punch the bad guy in the face if they see them as being, you're irredeemable, you're doing something that's blatantly bad. I've got to do this for the greater good. Yes. But I like to present bad guys or antagonists that you can identify with, and you can ideally empathize with them and understand what they're doing. And that crowning glory moment for me when they actually go, you've got a point, can I help? And that they side with them. And yeah, it's that moment of doubt where you think, actually, yeah, is there something I can do to either help you or steer you back on the straight and narrow as you see it, that means they won't automatically result to I pull my gun, I shoot them in the face, or I punch them in the gut, and they think of another way to deal with it.
Yeah, that's great fun, I think, is not only for the players to have that different approach to solving something, but a lot of us, we are all GMs by nature of kind of what we do, wanting to try different systems, but also wanting to play our own games, play test our material as well. So I think, Matt, that you're guilty of giving GMs fantastic kind of villains to play, and even calling them a villain probably isn't accurate. It's not fair. It's the antagonist, should we say, unwilling antagonist. I think that that is great for a GM because the GM gets to enjoy the game as well, guys, and that's important. But yeah, I'm a huge fan as well of playing getting to play with a character that the supposed investigators, heroes, characters, detectives, whatever they are, they kind of go, but I thought we were doing the right thing. No, stop. Yeah, they're really, really good fun. Questioning them. Yeah, absolutely. Jason, you sound like you want to jump in on that.
Oh, no, I was just basically saying that that is exactly right. It should be the antagonist. When the antagonist gives the players something for them to undo themselves, it's chef's kiss, because not only are you creating a wonderful narrative, you're giving the player investment in their own destruction.
Oh, yeah, that's another tagline of the day. I like that one. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Travis.
That is exactly what I was like. Giving the players the tools to their own destruction in a fun way when you have the buy-in is chef's kiss. It's fantastic. It's like, okay, we're all here to have a fun time, to be a little bit scared. We're going to a haunted house. We're not going to get hurt. But like, okay, if your character has a certain disposition, or my partner and I are co-DMs and we are unreliable co-narrators, both unreliable. And we try and describe things in a way that maybe not the best option could be really appealing. And we describe things targeted at certain players so that they like, oh yeah, I do like shiny things and we're in a shop. Maybe I could take something and no one would notice. Like that's a very mundane one, but they also get like more, if they don't speak every language in the book, or if they don't speak German or Swedish and they're somewhere and they hear someone mumbling something in Arabic, they might mistake it for like a different language and the Cthulhu verse of like, okay, they're chanting something interesting because they're playing someone from the 1920s who's never been to the Middle East before, and they have no idea that this is just how the language, we have this sound, it's a thing. But like giving unreliable information is fun from an entertaining perspective. Like many people on this call are professional actual play folks who maybe produce podcasts or who entertain others with their games. Combat is really boring to listen to. So nonviolent approaches are a fundamental part of what we try to do. We edit our combat to be fun and cool and try to compensate for it being what it is. But our core thing is, okay, how can we make the scariest scenario possible without spending an hour of you fight bandits and you win, or you fight a monster and maybe you get hurt, but ultimately you're still going and you fought the monster. And it's not as scary as like anything else I can do with you, or like maybe it scratched you a certain way, but like that's not going to be as scary as the lead into it, or getting to that haunted house with those elements described earlier. So really, like, one last thing I'll add, just like with Tom, silence can be quite entertaining and quite creepy when you leave the players with the silence and the ball is in their court and you've been very quiet, and then all of a sudden everything sort of stops and they're left to ponder like, well, where do we go from here? And that can be very uncomfortable. And I get uncomfortable in a fun way, as long as you have buy-in with the party and they're into that sort of thing. So these are tools that I endorse and say they're fun.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said. I mean, I obviously there's different aspects here, whether it's writing or whether it's GMing or even playing. But I think I'm in the same kettle of frogs, I think the metaphor goes there, Travis and Tom. I'm sure we all are, where as a GM, you want to provide those kind of cues in game and you want to provide those opportunities. And yeah, it can be really, it can be a fantastic payoff when you're able to present something and it's through your delivery or the way that you've presented a choice, or, as you say, Travis, so someone comes into the shop and you describe something, but you're describing it in a way that draws them to it, but you're not doing it in a way that makes them suspicious, even though that's the thing, that's the cursed thing. That can be a really nice thing that pays off later down the line. Or you make hard work for yourself and they don't do it, and then you've got to pick it up later on. Either way, it's good fun.
That's every time.
Yeah, every time. Absolutely. Paul.
And referencing hard work, being last in the queue.
Sorry, Paul.
No, it's fine. So, I mean, because some of what I was thinking about kind of ties in, I think, to some measure with what people have already mentioned, and these are really kind of small things, I suppose. In reference to, not directly about silence, there's, and it's a very limited tool as such, but the fade to black is really useful. Allowing the horror to lie just beyond the end of the scenario. It's when it's built up to the point and you sort of said, and there, however, I always find it hard to fade to back, or, the credits roll or something. I never know what quite to say to the players, but that moment when they almost hit the table or whatever the virtual equivalent might be of, you kidding, right? No, because they feel or know what's going to come next. I mean, fade to black sometimes is, I don't know, this is an entirely not topical example from media. I thought of Sapphire and Steel, which is really weird. The final episode of Sapphire and Steel is a fade to black moment where the horror of their situation, the protagonist situation, lies beyond the end credits. But more generally, there are those instances, where you just, for example, I ran an adventure recently where actually it was about ghosts and finding the source of something that was threatening, and they found it. But as they'd gone along, they'd seen things. They'd seen sort of urchins running around in the street or whatever, and they kind of just passed it by and they'd ignored it. And the situation ended in a church basement. And when they emerged into the graveyard afterwards, feeling somewhat triumphant in having achieved something, they then realized that they were beyond the graveyard fence, were all these children pressed against the fence with like this look about them, and I did a fade to back at that point, because they then realized that all these earlier references to these urchins were, there was a gathering threat. They should have, and they realized that despite their moment of success, the fact that the horror actually was still waiting for them outside. A more general thing, and I think links into what Matt said before, the shades of grey of don't over describe who's the good or the bad guy sort of thing, that generates an aspect of horror as well, and or at least an unease, especially when you force the players to make a decision about what they're going to do next. If you've built it up just right, they're then forced into this horrible sort of choice of especially if they're the bad guys. We get that slightly comedic moment of, we the bad guys, the people with the hats with the skulls. But yeah,
that was, I remember that. I even remember that scene now.
That's Michelin Webb.
Michelin Webb.
Anyway,
it's a skull and a cross.
Yeah.
Are you sure we're not the bad guys?
But that's useful. The shades of grey, and the other thing as well, and this is totally. You probably never get to use this. There's a fourth wall aspect to being able to introduce horror into adventures with a home gaming group who've had the situation before, where you are suddenly left with these. This is where you have to keep notes. These remnants of past adventures, where you can induce horror by a reference to something that has happened in the past. Now, Matt referenced my prime example of this earlier, the night floors and the impossible landscapes. I just have to mention linseed oil, harlequin costumes, strings, a hat stand, bizarrely enough. I can reference these in any adventure, and I will generate immediate discomfort in my group because of the connection, the fourth wall connection to what Impossible Landscapes did to them, and I might point out to me as a campaign. Okay.
Wow. Okay.
So that's a useful tool. Having a group and knowing what triggered them in the past. I know it's, as I said, it's very fourth wall to have it, but it provides you with a tool to ramp up the horror without violence, because their mind's doing it for you.
Amazing. Well, yeah. I mean, these are all. I think anybody who's listening, who's picking up kind of things here, and if they're anything like me, they're writing copious amounts of notes, which is usually why I kind of do these things at Illusion Con, and I just kind of make notes, and then occasionally we'll talk to other people and go, I've got really something clever to say right now, and then I'll just quote one of you guys, is the usual kind of process. But yeah, they're really, really good. I mean, yeah, we've covered loads there, and I think this idea of whether we're looking at, I don't want to use the word tricks, because it's way more rewarding than that, and it's way more planned than that. But as a GM, as a writer, if we're presenting these, I think opportunities is probably the right word. If we're presenting these opportunities for our players to experience horror through these tools and devices, then they're going to get, especially going back to Jason's kind of initial commentary on having that thematic overview that runs through everything, so that it kind of ties everything together, and we're not just kind of going, here's a trick, here's an opportunity, here's a device. As long as they're all connected together, you're building in that sense of tension, atmosphere, ups and downs, really driving that sense of existential dread, or the questioning. And I love that we've touched on as a group a few times how we all love that idea of, it's not necessarily a big bad evil guy, which does impact my next question quite adversarially, but it's not always a big bad evil guy. What it is oftentimes we're kind of going, well, look, not pointing at them and saying that's the bad guy, letting that subjective, letting those thoughts kind of simmer within the group, as a thought process, and hopefully potentially an argument within the group as well, which can always be fun. Those are really lovely moments because of the horror that's been presented without violence. So going on to my next question, which is now potentially broken. What interesting adversaries or big bad evil guys moments have you experienced, either as a player or as a GM or as a writer, where violence is not needed? So I suppose if we take out the big bad evil guy or keep them in, it's the idea that when you get to your big conflicting moments, you get to your big climactic things, what are some moments that you've had either written or played where you've gone, this was great, and it was done in a non-violent way? That's what we're looking for, I think, here to give some examples to our wonderful community. Travis, you were nodding really enthusiastically, so I think we're going to start with you and give Jason and Paul a break from going first or last. So Travis, go for it. Hit us with what you got.
I got two. One is I love playing with antagonists that are different, like you're saying. So one of them I did was just like a dead antagonist. The antagonist was dead before the adventure began. They built the dungeon. The dungeon is kind of the thing they're going through. It's a fantasy setting. They were hired. They didn't have a great life, and they took it upon themselves to make this place really, really tough to protect the treasure. And they're not a bad person, but they really don't like the idea of someone trying to break into this place, because that's what their job was. So they're pretty mean to you, but they've been dead for a long time, and all the messages they put in there were done well before they died thousands of years ago. So that's the end result. Is like, you find out that, this at the end, you get a little plaque, and it's like, yeah, this dedication, they never got to finish the last room, and she's been dead the whole time. And it's like, it's a little bit sad even, because you're like, oh. And you understand, like, she used the money to help her family, and it shows, like, dedicated by her grandchildren, and it's kind of fun. Another one, my big show, Dark Dice, we got this antagonist called the Silent One. The real enemy is sleep deprivation, and the Silent One is this creepy woodland shapeshifter, and he's got 3 eyes, and he can infiltrate your party pretty easily. And then if he does infiltrate your party and the party falls asleep on their own watch or something, or someone gets enchanted by his magical gaze, they're suddenly playing the Silent One. You can pass them a note, and they're now the Silent One, and their character is somewhere in the woods elsewhere, kidnapped temporarily or dazed and just walking off to use the bathroom or something. So it gives them a moment to shine as the villain without the other players kind of realizing it. And when they're trying to stay up, like, okay, what are you doing on watch? Oh, yeah, we're staring intently and doing nothing except looking everywhere. Well, okay, that's not going to last for long. You're not going to be able to concentrate for 4 hours of a shift in the middle of the night in the woods doing just that. Okay, we'll have a conversation. All right, have your conversation. Like a minute later, like they run out of things to say. Like, okay, well, what are you doing for the rest of your watch? So it's really a wear and tear. And the villain doesn't really want to fight you. He's a challenge rating like a 2 or 3 against level 4 players who are just going to destroy him if they fight. So his only job is just to keep them from getting sleep and to keep them from trusting each other. And at the end of the adventure, which you can play in Unnatural Horrors, our amazing Kickstarter book, please back it or whatever. At the end of this thing, you don't fight him. He doesn't want to fight you. He just wants to win. And his winning is just getting you to the final location, not at your best. And very likely you will fail. And if you don't, he might just stay with you and haunt you like a little spirit. He's not going to like follow you beyond the edge of his woods, but as long as you're in his domain, he's going to mess with you. And then there's no real central conflict. It's like when you're in LA and there's the smog, and the smog is with you always because you're in LA. And if you leave LA, the smog doesn't follow you unless you go somewhere else with the smog. So it's like a fixture, but he's definitely someone people really hate and want to fight. And he doesn't want to fight you. He just doesn't want you to sleep.
I really love some of those answers there, Travis. I think that's fantastic. I've written a few notes there. I really like some of that. I do think that the LA smog might be the nephew of the London smog. I think they're related, distant relations. When you go there, it's with you, and then you leave. But no, I really like that idea there you've talked about, where the antagonist refuses to get violent. That's quite an interesting, especially if the players think that that's going to be a violent confrontation, and then that option, I know we've talked about this, but that's another way of looking at it, where you kind of go, this isn't going to happen, we're not going to fight.
he's going to get like trounced. The whole thing is just like the encounters that you, because D&D, you want to fight things, of course. So the things that are there, they never get harder. The players just get weaker. Like they never have the chance to get the full rest to get their spells back. So when they use their cool blasty spells, they're like, by the time they get to the parts where having magic that's for non-combative situations would be quite useful, they've probably burned through it all. When they have reduced health, they've used all their hit dice and their cool abilities, they're just sort of left with their wits and trying to figure out, okay, how do we overcome an eldritch horror, which has no statistics because it's eldritch. You can't fight it. You just got to stop it from being created or get away from it very quickly before it consumes the world. So it's...
So yeah, two things on there, Travis. I like that's almost like a getting them. It's almost a bit of resource management. You could look at that in a system agnostic way. Get the players to use their resources that might equip them for a good fight, so that when they get to a point, and it's just like, well, you can't or I won't, and then there's that presented. But also the way you were talking about it just reminded me of a fantastic piece of media which I read as a graphic novel back in the 90s, but I know there's also films and another animated series now. The Watchmen. So for anybody who hasn't seen, read, or experienced The Watchmen, you're probably going to want to take your headphones off for a minute at home. But the wonderful finale. The spoiler is happening now. So if you are about to do that, this is the time. But that wonderful moment where they turn up, and it's very campaigny, isn't it? The kind of the team get there in the end, and they get there, and then they see Ozymandias, and they go, "We're going to stop you," and he goes, "You're 33 minutes late. It's already happened." And then they're like, what? And I know there is some violence, but what a beautiful storytelling moment. What a beautiful reward. You know, I mean, as a reader, you felt like you were with them, and just, fantastic. And I think that's a great antagonist who, a little bit like we've all said, Matt, I think you led us on this, that antagonist who is the villain because that's how people see him. Is Ozymandias the villain because of what Ozymandias does? It's a bigger, wider, I am trying to save humanity kind of thing. Very classic Alan Moore, I think, making us all look at him and go, wow. Thank you, Travis. Really, really bang on there. What we'll do is I'll mix up the order. So we'll come to Matt, then Jason, then Paul, then Tom. Tom, you're in the hot seat at the end this time. So good luck. Matt, go for it.
Oh, as Paul mentioned, one of my favourite TV shows of all time, I think I've got to definitely plug one of the episodes there, because Sapphire and Steel is frankly amazing, and ties in with our topic about having violence isn't an option when you're looking at such overwhelming opposition. Things like in my wheelhouse, the examples are the Outer Gods or the Great Old Ones. There's no way you can go and do anything physically against them. It's like an ant pressing its mandible up against your boot. You're going to have all that effect, or a fraction of that effect in comparison. And the second story of Sapphire and Steel in particular, it's set in this old abandoned train station where there are ghostly happenings occurring there. And by the end of that particular scenario for this purpose, the end of that scenario, the two players, Sapphire and Steel, have realised the depth and the power of what they're up against. They can only make a deal with it. And that's the only way that they can get out of this situation. And the level of horror that deal entails would be a very high-ranking self-check, going back to the Unknown Armies madness meters that I referenced right at the beginning, that he has to do something and sacrifice someone that goes almost counterpoint to his whole mission and his whole ethos, that he's out there to save people, to repair the timeline and the fabric of reality. And he deliberately gives away someone's kind of heart, mind, body, soul, and their whole of their life to this thing. And it's a real bombshell moment. It's kind of a gut punch of a narrative device to pull. So yeah, if you haven't seen Sapphire and Steel, definitely wholeheartedly recommend the whole thing.
Thank you.
Only 6 stories. They're some shorter than others, but yeah, that one, the longest one, is by far the best.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. Recommendation from Matt and Paul there. That's on the list as well. It's going to be a very busy Christmas, I think. It's telling my children to leave me alone while I watch all these things. The true meaning of Christmas. Children, go away. Okay. Thank you, Matt. Thank you. That's fantastic. Jason.
Honestly, I think the players and their own characters could be the best adversaries. I like to flip the script. when I'm using my adversaries, and I've done that several times. And the first example I'll give is semi-cheating, because the adversary was introduced in an act of extreme violence, where basically the character wakes up in their hotel room as this malformed creature is literally on top of them with the hotel iron, pressing it into their belly. So there was this huge act of violence. But by the end, like 8 episodes later, the adversary was the most pathetic creature, and the player wanted to help them. So I just, and by helping them, they became the monster. So they've, again, flipping the script. And then the same with the other, another instance, the entire campaign, the adversary was the character's father, this horrible, misogynistic, racist person that was trying to corrupt him and torture his friends. And the entire thing was them trying to escape. But by the end, when he had to confront his father, they're literally in hell. And they're thinking, okay, we're going to kill this demon, blah, blah, blah. They encounter the father as a child before he's corrupted and becomes this horrible person. So they literally have to kill him before he becomes the monster. And there's this wonderful fade to black moment. And yeah, I don't think there was a dry eye in the house at that point.
I love that. I know that's very much a player consent, player buy-in aspect in regard to this. What can we, how can we cleverly, the enjoyment for the GM sometimes is how can we deliver those themes and that narrative where the players end up turning, what are they willing to do to make things happen, and it can become a very brilliant, rich story, but also very kind of dark. And as I said, I got my first taste of Cult last night. And that was very much one of those situations. What are you willing to do in this situation? And it was
Just
fantastic.
Lovely. It's just lovely watching the blood drain from a player's face when they realize, oh, I have to be the monster now.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
And it does. It presents, I think, especially for those of us who've been gaming for a long time as well, those kind of challenges, those moments, they feel fresh. They feel really alive. I mean, I know last night, I'm in by trade, I'm an actor. Improvisation is something that I should be quite good at. And last night there were moments where I had the GM Ryan, who was amazing, asking me and one or two of the other players questions, who were also very tried and tested, podcasters, role players, and there were moments where we were going, we could, but, and it was brilliant. It was a really lovely thing to sit in. Fantastic. Thank you, Jason. Paul.
I'm going to admit to being spent at this point in terms of having probably covered stuff already, and I'm not sure I have anything fresh to bring. I mean, I think generally speaking, and I touched on it before, it's the Shades of Grey is generally the one where it has always proved the most interesting, or those characters where the players are put in a situation. You probably realize you're successful when the players have to then side quest themselves into a half an hour argument / discussion about what to do next, because fundamentally they don't know. And as a GM, I often find that while I quite like to push the session along, I realize there's far more to be gained from letting them screw themselves into tighter and tighter balls of anxiety, stress, pain, and whatever, because they realize they're in such a bad place, despite the fact that what they're confronting is, they know on a fundamental level what they're seeing or who they're seeing, and what they've and yeah, I'm kind of struggling to give fresh examples. And I'm probably going to give really bad examples, but I mean, I to quote something of my own, I wrote an adventure called Infertile Soil for the desanction, where the agents are sent to basically just deal with a witch. It's set during the Elizabethan period, and they are sent to deal with a witch. But when they find her, she is this just absolute young slip of a girl who clearly has been beaten by the people of the village, because she's a witch. She has to be, she's been abused basically during her imprisonment. And the more the players, however, then begin to look, it's one of those situations where they look at the villagers, what they've gone through, look at the perceived witch, and the more information they get, the harder it becomes for them because they see the different sides of it. And what they find, there are horrors in it as they begin to literally unearth some of the truth around the situation. It then just gets more complicated, and the horrors as a result, their struggle with it becomes sort of self-imposed because they have to make a decision. The one I mentioned earlier, and I'm still not going to explain it, Tainted Meat, very much has a conclusion rather like that. It is when we weigh everything up, it feels like we should move in one direction. And lots of adventures possibly have the notion of a very apparent horror, but is it the real evil? There is a focus to everything, but is it truly the focus, or is it our preconceived sense that it should be the thing that we're dealing with, and realizing how to challenge that, and then just I'm waffling now. Going back to Impossible Landscapes, for example, there's a guy called Darabondi in it, and he's a really tortured individual, and I won't go into too heavily, but he's a really horrible man, but he's already being horribly tortured for what he did. And when I went through the campaign with my players, some of the horror was in, this is a really horrible individual. Should we help him? Should we save him? Is there a way to save him? Sort of thing. And again, there is a lot of value in leaving the players to argue about what's right and wrong, and do they do something, or do they just pull away from it and leave it be?
And I like, you're kind of very much hinting there at that idea of giving the players an element of doubt, so that there is space for them to have those conversations and have those hard decisions and dilemmas to make. Yeah, absolutely, Paul. Thank you. Tom, last but very much not least.
Yay! Just a quick thing, because it came up in the YouTube chat, another recommendation for a great 4-panel manga called Four Scary Panels, if you understand the meaning, recommended by a friend of mine.
Excellent, thank you.
Just to add to the list. And I am very much on board with letting the player characters maybe become the adversaries, and having their inner sides do horrible stuff. So I just gonna go into the entirely different direction, and go for a fairy tale antagonist, the fairies from Changeling the Lost. I had a game with Red Moon role playing about with Changeling, and in the end they actually faced the fairy, and it might be a metaphor for the parental abuse the characters have suffered through in their childhood, and you can't kill a fairy, especially not on their own turf. So they were grasping for straws at this moment as the confrontation came, and it was only solvable by making a deal. And one of the characters made a horrible and beautiful choice in this moment. And they had to go outside of the box, because this adversary, who had literally a chain around the neck of one of them, wasn't defeatable by any violent means, and they had to, yeah, find anything, something, and it was brilliant. The desperation in this moment, and then the dawning of, well, I have an idea what might help. I don't want to, but it might be the right thing. It just has terrible consequences for me, and I really loved it. But I very much also like, yeah, let's have the players dig their own grave by being the horrible
Yeah.
persons in Oakwood Heights.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think what I love the phrase you've used there, that idea of beautiful horror, and I think that's what we're all aspiring to, is to give the players that sense. Just we are getting very close to our time to sign off, so what I'd like to do is I'd like to be able to just go around, everyone just remind us who they are, where we can find them, but also in that final moment, what's your last gem? Is there any kind of key final note you'd like to push, whether it's sharing the fun of horror with our players, or anything that you'd specifically like to do? So we'll go Jason, Tom, Matt, Travis, Paul, and then I will give us our final send off. So Jason, who you are, where we can find you, and any final words of wisdom.
I'm Jason Pryor, writer, game designer, and general curmudgeon. You can find me on Blue Sky and the X at Otter Poet. I'm more moving to Blue Sky these days. There's going to be some announcements shortly. There's the reason I'm actually in Tokyo. So look for that. And I guess my snippet would be rely on your players, because if you've got good players, chances are they want to be there. They want to experience this horror, and they're going to feed you. Don't just rely on the story that you've got in front of you. Let them tell the story. It's a collaborative effort. So let them torture themselves.
Excellent. Thank you. Tom.
Hi, I'm Tom Moore. Also on Blue Sky with the very same name. Also on startplaying.games as a GM. And you can find me on this Discord and on the Discord of Onyx Path and a few others. So yeah, that are good places to get in contact with me. And I might want to add to Jason there. Never tell your players how the characters are feeling. Never ever do this. They lose agency in a horror game, but this is the part they always must have agency, and they always must be able to make a meaningful choice. This is what horror is about, at least from my perspective. Never tell them you are feeling frightened.
Mhm.
They just might reject it, and it's much more much more buy-in if they explore this feeling on their own.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, absolutely. Matt.
Hello, as I said, Matt Sanderson. You can find me over at blasphemoustomes.com, the website for our podcast, The Good Friends of Jackson Elias. I do hang around on Discord and a few places, over at the Into the Darkness Discord channel as well, for the actual play group that puts stuff up on YouTube. So yeah, we're a great bunch of people. Come over and say hello. Nuggets final words. Don't be afraid to take away violence as an option from the PCs. That if you, the reworking what I was going to say there, necessity is the mother of invention. If you remove that as an option, players will come up with creative ways to solve a situation, and let them be creative. Don't just say give them a sword or give them a gun and then they'll take the easy route out. Make them think, and it will have a lot more resonant ending, a lot more fun ending for everyone at the table.
Yeah, that's really nice, and being able to reward that thinking as well with an outcome. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, thank you, Matt. Travis.
I am Travis Vengroft. I am also, you can find me as Dark Dice Pod on all the social medias, or The White Vault, which is another fun one, or Ven Travis, VEN, my last name, easy part, plus Travis, in the backwards order, because I could get that one. Last bits of advice for you would be agency and feelings. I really want to echo that and add to, like, if you're using a sanity system, For instance, our sanity system for 5e. Like, you can say, like, how are you going to interpret seeing this thing? It could be in a way of fear, it could be in a way of disgust, but giving them the tools to really bury themselves deeper into the hole. Like, give them the shovel, don't hit them with the shovel. That could be quite helpful. Even if you're using a system that's pre-established and uses sanity in certain ways, give them the agency to interpret like in combat, you'd say, okay, when you hit something, what happens? You give them the freedom to describe how cool their character is. Well, how uncool are you? Like, help us with that. Help us learn how you're emotionally dealing with some of these terrors that you're going to likely experience if you're playing horror games.
Fantastic. Thank you, Travis. And Paul.
I'm Baldowski. You can find me on justcrunch.com which has lots of links to the games I create, and also allrolled-up.co.uk, which is run by my wife, which is where my published stuff, my personal stuff is. And I am also quite rightly on Blue Sky, well away from the other place, as Paul Baldowski. I think, as usual, coming last. Anyway. It's in terms of I'm going to probably say something which likely gets picked up on everything else. It's around, actually, in terms of the fun of horror, safety tools, the whole business of understanding at the table that having fun with horror is dependent upon, well, the fun part as much as the horror part. If you don't have a safe space which is clearly agreed with everyone at the table, someone or many people may not have fun. And it is open to everybody at the table. Something I am more than happy to mention anecdotally every time this comes up is a horror adventure I ran where I became the person who was no longer in a safe space, which was the weirdest experience I have ever had. But as I was describing the final scene of the adventure, I realized I was beginning to sweat, as in a cold sweat, and my stomach had kind of screwed up into a knot, and I realized that I was needing to call a stop to the session because I had tripped my own threshold, which was weird because I'd read the adventure, obviously, and I was running it. There was nothing I was saying that wasn't written in the adventure, but I somehow had tripped my own threshold, and I had to call a stop to the session for 5 minutes. Having fun with horror is definitely about ensuring that everybody you've sorted it out, and it can be as simple as saying an open, this is an open table, just call it if there's something going wrong. You can obviously go into the more detailed tools of lines and veils and dex cards and so forth, but these days I go for an open table. So but that's where the fun has to come from, knowing the table and having the tools to be able to call a halt if you need to.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Absolutely echo those words. And Paul's told me that story about when he was playing the My Little Pony role-playing game as well. So, no, but in all seriousness, thank you, Paul. Really lovely words to kind of bring us to a conclusion. I'm T.A. Newman. I've been your host for this panel. You can find me at the Miskatonic Playhouse or at the Miskatonic Repository convention as well. I've written some Call of Cthulhu scenarios. They're available on Drive-Thru RPG. I've got more things coming out in the future, but it's been an absolute wonderful thing. The final note from me, I'm going to quote a very wise man as the final note on this horror convention, and I'd say horror is the change of the natural order. That wise man has been with us today. Panelists, thank you so much for your time. You've been amazing. It's been really lovely to chat to you, spend time with you, and thank you everybody at home for being with us. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.